What happens when you want to do a piece of wood wall art? If you've got a CNC like I do, that's the logical conclusion. What if your CNC work area is 300mm square and you want to place it in roughly the middle of a 550mm blank? That's when it gets a bit trickier. While you can use the CNC, the first step isn't actually to cut it into your blank, but to cut it larger in some plywood to use as a guide for your router and a guide bush. In this case, I wanted to create some wall art for Sleeping Duck using their Ducky logo. I started by cutting out the template on the X-Carve. Then, using Burt, I cut down some offcuts from Mum's TV unit to make their 550 by 550mm blank. Clamping a panel like this isn't particularly tricky, but boy do the parallel clamps make it even easier. After it was all dried, I did fill the voids with epoxy, which then needed to be sanded smooth. Using a 10mm guide bushing with a 1/4" bit, these are the stock standard combo that comes with this Makita trim router, I followed my guide and cut out the area for the inlay. I was surprised at how well the little router held up and how easy it was to control. Unfortunately, I did slip and it shows in the final product, but this is the first time I've done anything like this, so forgive me. The foot and the beak were done the same way, though on a separate template. This meant I could maximise the size of the duck. To contrast with the Tassie Oak billet, I cut down some Jarrah to about 6mm on the bandsaw, then cut that out on the CNC. This was for the feet and beak. Given the density of Jarrah, I was pleasantly surprised at how cleanly that cut out. The radius of the guide bushing and router bit meant a lot of the smaller details couldn't be cut out using the guide, so I had to come back by hand and carve it out. This wasn't super difficult as I wasn't going particularly deep and the bulk of the material was already cut out, but it was time consuming. I made sure to strop my chisel very frequently and that made it even easier. For the main body, I already had a thin blackwood panel from a previously failed project. Again, I was surprised at how well this cut out on the CNC, this time using the walnut setting in easel. get everything flush, I could have just sanded, but it would have taken forever. After a quick hone, that little Luban block plane was a gem to work with, cleanly slicing away with no problems. I didn't get all of my sizings right. Unfortunately, scaling something like this is pretty tricky, and I should have broken it into smaller pieces. As such, I had to fill the gaps with filler. After that dried, I could sand it off, and it didn't look too bad. For the finish, I put down 2 coats of Ruston's Danish oil. If you've not used Danish oil, it is an oil varnish blend, that is, it contains a bunch of tung oil and polyurethane. It's a very thin finish, so it's very difficult to build a film. However, it really helps with popping the grain. To give it a top coat, I decided to go with shellac, this time trying out French polishing. I didn't go do any grain filling, but I thought, what the hey, I'll give it a shot. It basically involves putting down about 100 or more layers of very, very thin coats of shellac. Once all the finish was dried, I added some screws, some felt pads and some picture hanging wire. So in the end, this actually turned out okay. There's quite a few mistakes, but given this is the first time I've done any wood inlay, I'm not too unhappy about it. I really like the contrast with the Jarrah, and the Tassie Oak hasn't quite come out as red as I hoped. I should have used red gum for that. And the Blackwood with the finish actually did pop quite a bit. It's also the first time I've done any sort of French polishing, so it's really nice finish. You can see it's catching the light there. It's really quite glossy, but unlike say gloss polyurethane, it doesn't have that real plasticky feel to it. It's very hard to describe. Has almost glass-like quality to it. Now it's not a perfect French polishing job. I didn't do any pore filling, grain filling, that sort of stuff, and I just kind of had a go at it to see how it would go. So it's not particularly difficult. It is time consuming, but I think it's a little bit, once you get the hang of it, it's probably easier to apply than polyurethane. That being said, polyurethane is probably easier to apply to surfaces that aren't just flat and relatively small. Be a lot of work to do, say, a dining table French polished. So tomorrow, or the same day that this video goes up, I will get this installed in Sleeping Duck's office, and hopefully it looks pretty good there. Thanks for watching.